Welcome to another episode of the Carry Trainer Higher Line podcast. Good evening or afternoon or morning, depending on where you're at. Just because it's evening here doesn't mean it's evening where you're at. That's science, Dr. Aprill, science. We're here on another episode of the Higher Line podcast this evening with our friend Dr. William Aprill, who seems to not be enjoying my jokes so far today. He's not enjoying my jokes. How are you, sir?
Well, it begs the question of whether I ever did now, doesn't it?
Damn. Mr. Aprill's known in some circles as a very cutting man. I think it's his way of trying to impress us with his intellectual superiority, and I've used up all the big words I had, so that was all I had. That was all the big words. I ran out. I went completely blank.
We're playing with live ammo tonight.
So we were chatting the other day. I wanted to get you back on here. A lot of reasons, but I think the best one is you are like the go-to guy that I know of, and probably anybody else knows of, to talk about the realities of violence. And it seems like every day I was in Ohio the other day, and I'm taking a bath, laying in the hotel. My back's killing me, and I don't read the news often. And every once in a while, I'll like punch something into Google and just see what comes up. And I wrote local crime, and it's horrific. And that's kind of like your jam.
Yeah, I have an old-fashioned habit. I like to read the newspaper, and it's interesting. No matter where I go, read the paper, and part of the problem with that is that good news will never be the lead in any media. I mean, the headline in your local paper will never be 400,332 people not killed yesterday.
Yeah.
So
the sun was shining.
Yeah, it's certainly skewed in that respect. I mean, the only thing that makes the paper is bad news, especially about crime. But then again, it's the only place to kind of get a snapshot of some of what's happening in your town, the day before.
Yeah. And I think why we want to talk about this for you guys that are listening is that's the reality of violence. It's not shooting paper targets. It's not practicing for the wild scenario that you might come up with your group of training guys. It's the stuff that happens every day in middle America and big cities and little cities across our globe.
Yeah, one of the things that I really like about looking in the paper is that you're not relying on your own imagination. The dilemma of relying on your own imagination is unless you're just absolutely scrupulous, you're likely to imagine things that work for you, things that you like, things that you would prefer. The paper tells you what happened. And what I like to do is, using the paper I just do it for about a minute every time I read the paper. Literally pick some blurb in the paper that has any intersection at all with my life. A little blurb in the paper might say, man robs dry cleaners. Then you read the story, and some guy walked into a dry cleaners and pointed a shotgun at the clerk and emptied the registers and ran away. Okay. Well, that closed my eyes, and I think about my dry cleaners, because I go to the dry cleaners, and I picture it in my mind, right? Mine is a long linear space with the door off to the left, and you walk in and you're sort of facing this long counter. So what would happen if a guy walked in the door with a shotgun while I'm standing there? Am I going to do something? Am I not going to do something? Am I getting robbed? Am I not getting robbed? And it has the benefit of actually having happened. It's not something I ever thought of before or would love to, have happen, because a lot of people out there in the kind of protection space, self-protection space, fantasize about what they're going to do. That's not bad altogether unless it becomes, that much of our headspace. It becomes that self-referential, where we're sort of mentally rehearsing something that we hope happens. In the study of martial arts, you'll hear about the brown belt syndrome. Somebody can fight a little bit and they start thinking about, gee whiz, when do I get to fight? They want to put all this sort of stuff to a test. And it's not unusual for people to have that kind of mental approach to it. They want something palatable to happen, so they can be the hero. That's not bad necessarily, but it is misleading. But that little bit of visualization, using somebody else's story, can help you get out of the rut of just practicing what you like, even mentally.
Because you see, it's not something you're rehearsing or having to come up with. It happened right there down the street at
the benefit of the real benefit, I think, of training is that at least some of it has to be non-consensual. You didn't pick the thing you're good at. You didn't pick the thing to do. Todd Lewis Green had a great line, the late pistol trainer. Todd Lewis Green once said, "If you shoot alone, you're always in first place."
Yeah.
That's such a great line. Competition in and of itself is non-consensual. The other person's trying to beat your ass. And if you do badly, they will. Training that's non-consensual is really important. So I think even visualization can be non-consensual, so to speak, if it's somebody else's scenario, especially if it's an actual scenario that happened in your town.
Yeah, I dig that. I've been talking the last couple of years with students about this idea, and this is not just for the practice of martial crafts, but whatever your goal is, think about what you're doing, like right now or this week or whatever time frame you choose, and is what you're doing supportive of the goal or supportive of your dream or your wish? And it could be like my dream or wish or hope for my life or this day. And when I ask people, like, so why do you train that thing, whatever it is, that drill or that mechanical thing that you're doing, or some range kind of ism, the scanning or whatever, good or bad, right or wrong, why are you doing it? And then sometimes they don't know, or they say, well, somebody told me. And I say, well, do you think it's making you safer or preparing you to prevail in violence? Yeah. And they could be right, but we start talking about that. And then the question becomes, well, how do I know if what I'm training is preparing me for violence? It's like, well, look at the realities of violence. Like, it might be different than a contractor in Afghanistan or the Sudan or something versus the streets of America, but what's the reality that you're facing?
Yeah, it really does, beg the question, how much, training or practice or going shooting overlap, right? I think it was James Youre who first made that statement. There's a difference between going shooting and training, but there's also a difference between going shooting, training, and practice.
Yeah.
We'd like to think that training points out either new things to do or flaws in your existing game. Then you practice to either learn that new thing or, remediate that flaw in your game.
Yeah.
But if practice is unstructured, if you're just going shooting, then you're doing, it's just sort of like, throwing darts at a wall, not even at a dartboard. When you ask people why they're doing certain things on the range.
By the way, I've done that. I've thrown darts at a wall before too.
That's pretty drunk. But when you ask people why they're doing what they're doing at the range, it really kind of boils down to because it seemed like a good idea.
Yeah.
And then so it's very hard to say, well, why did it seem like a good idea without the person sort of feeling put on the spot?
Yeah.
Because people tend to get pretty prickly at the range, both giving and taking advice.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because when you look at why people do what they do, is it structured? I often ask people, what do you plan on doing in your next range trip? And they'll say, oh, I'm probably going to shoot about 100 rounds or 250 rounds. And I say, okay, but doing what? And that's sort of a bizarre question, for a lot of folks. And, are there things you're doing on a baseline, right? Things you shoot every week, let's say, to see how you're doing, or every time you go, let's say. So it's always interesting to find out how structured or unstructured, or even is the concept of the practice being structured new to them, new to the person.
Yeah. It really illustrates, and like you said, you got to be careful how, if somebody on here is an instructor or a teacher, you got to be careful how you pose that, because you'll be surprised how many people have no idea how to answer that question, which tells you they're really not, it's not that they're not serious, but they haven't gone deep enough down that path to understand what we're talking about. Would you agree?
Yeah, and also, there's a really interesting thing, which is that people have taken kind of I hate the term elitist in this respect, but a lot of people have taken sort of an elitist approach to going shooting, right? Going shooting is supposed to be fun.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not having any fun at all, then you've made your training aversive.
Right.
If your training is if your training is as much fun as going to the dentist, you won't do very much of it, right? And then that'll have downstream effects too. So there's nothing wrong with going shooting, but a lot of times if you go to especially a public range, you'll see people who are just literally enjoying themselves making noise.
Yeah.
They don't care what they hit. They don't know what they're doing. They don't care. That's perfectly okay. It's their money. It's their time. They can do whatever they want. What I worry about is people who think they're practicing, think they're doing skill building, and are not. And those are the folks.
Crazy new gym videos. You see all those videos of the gym people post now, where there's like some guy doing crazy, bizarre, weird shit, and you half of them are a joke, but I think it's analogous to what you're talking about. It might be funny or fun, but it's not making him stronger or more physically fit. It's just
a lot of them. If you look at it, some of those people on those videos, I think the ones that are real are kind of sad because somebody walked up to a machine, didn't know what it was unwilling to ask someone to tell them what it was. So you'll see them on a pec deck or something, grabbing it with their hands and moving it in and out or something strange. And, they just walked up to it and sort of tried to figure it out. Yeah. Well, it's really a lost opportunity for the kind of self-protection community if somebody who does want to use a gun to protect themselves is in that same boat. I mean, I feel like we've missed an opportunity there, to bring somebody into the tent. And I am firmly convinced that gun people do more to alienate non-shooters and beginning shooters than anybody else ever could.
I agree with that.
I mean, we turn some people off. We really do. And that's something I think, we need to take a long, hard look in the mirror about. I mean,
that brings up something I wanted to talk with you about. And I'm not changing the subject, but I don't think that I started referring to this community that you and I overlap in. So you're a psychologist. I teach people how to shoot guns. You do some of that. I do exotic dance instruction, but somewhere in the middle we overlap. And some people have termed that as the industry. And I joke with people, I go, it's not an industry. Shooting guns is not an industry. Like making cars is an industry. Building computers is an industry, but like shooting guns is not an industry. So I started calling it an ecosystem. What's that?
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad word for it because I mean, even the business of training people, right, in the self-protection space isn't really an industry. It's a bunch of, if you really wanted to be, downhearted about it, you'd call it a bunch of cults of personality. That's exactly where people are following someone.
Yeah. Who's my Jesus? Who's my apostle? My apostle of the gun.
And then it was funny. I was speaking to a graphic designer once, and it was very interesting. He said, don't tell me anything about the business. Let me go find it online like a new person would. And he came back to me about a week later at our next scheduled meeting, and he said, your business is insane. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I've worked in all kinds of things. And he listed, robotic surgery, all these incredibly disparate kinds of industries, exotic stone imports, all this kind of stuff. He said, I can go online in any of those businesses, and in 15 minutes of searching, I can tell you who the players are. Who's the biggest robotic surgery manufacturer in the world? He said, I can find that out. Find out who's number 2, who's number 6. He said, your business, I can't tell who's anybody. I can't tell who's notable. I can't tell who's infamous. I can't tell who's good. Mirrors. Yeah. Who's bad. It's just this incredible mishmash. And all you really have to go on is who's good at, let's say, who's got a better website,
So that's kind of what I'm driving at. So then like I started calling this an ecosystem when I'm communicating with people. And somebody that had a background in biology goes, it's not an ecosystem. That's living organic creatures in a certain biosphere. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's a bunch of people interacting through this web and through physical contact and trade shows and all vying for different things, some good, some bad. There's like predators in there, and there's kind people, and there's people just looking to be part of it because they enjoy it. And I did a video on our YouTube channel on a pistol made in South America. And the only reason I did it was hundreds of people have asked, hey man, why don't you ever review such and such pistol? And I don't really review stuff. That's not what I do. But occasionally I might say, hey, by the way, this is a blah, blah, blah thing, and I enjoy it. And, you know, you could too. So I went and bought one of these guns, a couple $100, not a big deal. And I had my holster maker send me a specific holster. I got a couple extra magazines, and I took it to the range and I shot it. And it was a little funky compared to what I'm used to, but whatever. Next time I'm out there with Drew, we filmed a video. And I said, okay, I'm going to, I'll shoot some groups, and then I'll do some mag dumps, and I'll see how the thing reloads. And I pulled the trigger a few times while running through a magazine, and nothing happened. And I'd reset the trigger and pull it again, and nothing had happened. And then I'd pull it again, and it would go off. And this happened like 5 times. And I looked at the camera, and I'm like, well, I'm done with this thing. Like, you saw what just happened. It's not the ammunition. If I pull the trigger and it doesn't go off, that's it. I brought 2 guns of this manufacturer to the range. One of them I really liked. One of them I didn't. And we made 2 videos, and people went berserk. You're an idiot. You don't know how to shoot a gun. You're a dumbass. That $200 gun is amazing and better than any gun ever made under the sun. You have no legitimacy. You've been paid off. Somebody paid you to say this. And it was just like this tirade of various absurdity. And I started responding to people like, well, I told you I paid for it myself. And you saw the next video where I was happy with something from the same manufacturer. So clearly I'm not trying to smear them. But I started thinking about it, and I did a follow-up video, and I said, hey guys, like, are we defined by the stuff we buy, or are we defined like as my value or my worth or my ability to have a good life predicated on the stuff that I buy? Like, you're a psychologist. Why do men, I know women do it a little bit. I'll walk with my wife in the mall, and she dresses nice. I'll see other ladies, look her up and down and kind of like smirk at her shoes, or, ooh, like, nice purse. Women do it too, but they're not like assholes like dudes. What's that all about?
Well, but I mean, affiliation is a very powerful drive, right? I mean, if you think about one of our most basic instincts is what's called herding. Right? When you're alone, you're very much at risk in terms, think of our ancestors, right? Alone makes you vulnerable to predation, all sorts of things like that. A herd is just safer. And so we love to affiliate. My favorite is, you get people who really take like Chevy versus Ford.
That's the first thing that came to mind. Yeah.
Seriously. I mean, they're not playing around, but think about sports teams.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm a Yankees fan. Oh, really? How come? Did you grow up watching them as a kid? No, I just am. Oh, well, that's really weird, in a way. But, affiliation makes us feel good, and especially about things that you could use, at least theoretically, to save your life. We want them to be special. I don't want my gun to be normal. I want it to be a great gun that actually is going to work, and I'm going to use it to save my life. And so when you say, well, geez, I shot this gun, it wasn't so good, on a certain level, you are saying to that person, your life is at risk. You've made a bad choice, and you are closer to death because of that choice you've made. Now, they don't think that consciously. Wow, Manny Scratch doesn't like my gun, which means it doesn't work, which means I made a bad choice, which means I'm more likely to die. Well, I don't like that very much. No, that's not how it works. But the threat is kind of unconscious, and it's experienced as just this dissonance. What? He's saying what? And so they respond to it viscerally. Just thought it through, right? Objectively, the goal is to get the best thing you can get your hands on. That if something better came along, you'd not be wedded to the lesser thing. You'd get the better thing immediately. But most of us don't do that. right?
Yeah.
Certain things speak to us in certain ways. I mean, for a lot of us, like the very first pistol I ever fired was in 1911. And the first cut is the deepest, right? It never.
Now you got a whole wall full of them, right?
No, I don't own any, as a matter of fact.
No.
But that doesn't mean it doesn't speak to me. I look at them and go, "Ooh, that's a nice one." They speak to me. There's kind of a parking spot in my head for that gun being my first and most familiar. And
I can 100% agree with that. Yeah.
The danger is
my first vehicle.
Yeah, the danger is to kind of extrapolate from that. It's my first, and so it's most familiar, and it has this kind of romantic valence to it. Well, that doesn't mean it's good necessarily. And it's easy to make that connection. If I like it, it must be good. Well, that ain't true at all, right?
Yeah.
Because there's somebody down the block with a terrible gun.
Yeah.
But in a sense, changing horses in midstream, so to speak, saying I'm abandoning this choice and going with this choice is a little bit of an abandonment of your own identity if you're not careful.
Yeah.
We'd like to think that that we're.
I've always been a Cubs fan. Now, how can I not be a Cubs fan?
Yeah, how can I look in the mirror and not be a Cubs fan, right? That kind of thing. I mean, it sounds absurd when you say it out loud, but we're not saying it out loud, and these aren't cognitive processes. They're much deeper than that and much more primal than that.
I kind of wondered, and you just touched on it, like when I thought about why would these people be getting so upset? And I thought, okay, well, I'm a young guy. I'm putting myself in some of their positions. I don't have a lot of disposable income. I decided to go out and buy this thing. I would be feeling, you took it farther to them being in danger of their gun not being able to protect them. I just thought, here's this half gray-haired guy saying, I don't know how to make good buying choices. I don't know how to spend my money wisely. I don't know how to walk into a gun store and be a man and make a good choice. And I mean, that, I suppose there may be some truth to that, but I kind of the deeper idea is, why did you buy it to begin with? Like you said, to protect yourself.
Yeah, of course. But those things are sort of nested within each other. That I made a good consumer choice, but that the consumer choice was also supposed to be done in service of protecting myself, protecting my loved ones, things like that. And so that whether we mean to or not, there's a sort of a thread that connects the surface choice to much deeper, more kind of unconscious motivations. And when you pluck on it at one end, it's like a guitar string. It vibrates all the way to the other end, and you can be activating somebody's kind of unconscious fears, certainly without meaning to, or in your case, likely meaning to. I
tried to actually be very polite in that video, as I am cognizant of this phenomenon, but. I even explained, I like the other stuff from this manufacturer. You just saw my experience, period. And the comical thing, on another note, I did all that work with the SIG P365, and there were people that had a visceral hatred for SIG and for that gun. And I had a somewhat bad experience with it. It's right here, actually. It had to get sent back to the factory. And I said, even though it had to go back, it still intrigues me. I still like shooting it. It still is a cool tool. You were bought off. SIG paid you to put this out there to like trick us into buying more of their junk. No, go ahead.
I want some of that payoff money. I mean, where do you line up to get it? I'll love or hate anything if the check is all right. Got enough zeros in it,
I got to be honest, from my own personal psyche, it offended the shit out of me. Like, what? I have zero integrity that I'll take a free gun to just tell people whatever, like my own opinion. Or then the other thing it made me feel is do you people think my own opinion is so invalid? Like I can't formulate an opinion on my own. So I had this own little like internal thing going on about it. It pissed me off, actually.
Well, but the interesting thing would be to ask yourself, what do you care? What do you care? What do you care what somebody else thinks about what you said?
Well, that is a good.
I mean, if they agree, are you righter? If they disagree,
No.
are you wrong?
No.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No.
You know, like what I would say is, you know, one of the toughest things to do is to live experimentally, which means try things.
Talking about like try things.
Oh, I think you should try whatever you want. I'm not one to judge, you know. You know, that when you know, people say, oh, I can't, you know, people come, you know, this happens clinically all the time. Oh, I have these incredibly frustrating interactions with my husband or wife or boss or whoever. And I'll say, well, have you ever thought about saying this instead? Oh, I can't say that. Well, why not? Oh, I just can't. What they mean is they don't want to find out what would happen if they did.
Give me an example.
Sure. Like, here's living experimentally. This is what I do, right? I whenever I buy a gun in a same niche, like let's say this niche is a full size. I mean, I may own fewer guns than anybody you know. I think I own maybe 8 or 10 guns total.
Mm-hmm.
That's everything from pocket pistols to shotgun. And what I do is I have sort of niches, right? You know, kinds of guns. Like let's say a full size carry, you know, a full size service caliber carry pistol. Okay, great. Right now it's an M&P 2.0, right? I really like it. If something else comes along that's intriguing, that's in that same niche, and if it's intriguing enough, I'll buy one.
Mm-hmm.
And then run it real hard for a very short period of time. And if it's better than my current, let's say my M&P 2.0, I'll get rid of that. I'm always trying to get the best one. I don't keep one, but it's got to be demonstrably better, right? It's got to have, you know, things I can clearly point to and say, oh yeah, I shoot this one better, or it functions better, or in some way demonstrably better, or not, or if not, it goes. So one thing that's good is I wind up selling a lot of really good guns that just weren't better than what I have in a certain niche, right? Now, if I sort of create a new niche, then I have to find what I think is the best gun in there, but then the process continues. That's what I mean by living experimentally. If I'm still shooting the exact same gun in 5 years, that means nothing better has come across my path.
Yeah.
And so not to be wedded to any particular one, that takes work, right? You know, interactionally with people, it's a matter of, you know, can you work up the courage to say the thing that you wish you'd said and see what happens? Most people are afraid of the conversation because they'll do a lot of what we call catastrophizing or awfulizing. You know, let's say you're the boss and you come in and say, hey, look, I really need you to do this today. What I want to say is, wow, that's really not enough time for me to do a good job. But I don't say that because if I did, you'd get mad and you'd tell me I'm a terrible employee and you'd fire me. Well, wait a minute. We don't know if any of those things are going to happen.
Yeah.
Until you can tolerate the distress of that risk, you won't say anything new. But you know, one of the cliches in my other business is if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. And so if you don't say the words over and over and over again, you'll get the same result over and over and over again. So living experimentally is got a whole bunch of different applications. But the point is, you're trying to have a slowly refining process of comparing your current state to a goal state, whether that's a piece of equipment or a practice or a belief. You're comparing what you've got to what you think you might want, right? I want better. Well, how about this? Is this better than that? Mm-hmm. You know, it's a little bit like going to the eye doctor, right? You know, they say better here or here. Mm-hmm. That's not a bad way to live. Is this better or worse? Yeah, the other one's better. Okay, then.
I like that. I like to personally, the way my brain works is I'm constantly looking at things and I say, does this take me closer or farther from where I want to be? And something simple, not too easy to understand, is like talking on the phone, gossiping about people. Hey, did you hear what that Dr. Aprill guy did the other day at a class? You know, like people, you know how people are in our industry, you know, want to bust each other's sacks. Like, okay, that's some fun, juicy stuff to spend a half an hour of my life killing. Does it help me sleep better, get more customers, be a better teacher, shoot better, you know, take longer walks with my wife at night? Like, nope. All right, I'm done. Got to go by.
Yeah. But you know, everything isn't in service of industry, I would hope. I mean, there's some things you're going to do just because they're fun,
Sure.
just because because they're enjoyable. I mean,
so that would just be one goal. Yeah. So
exactly.
The goal is to live a long, full, happy life.
Yeah. It always intrigues me that when you ask people about things that make them unhappy, it can seem like a really banal question to say, why do you do it? Because the answer is almost always, well, I have to. And what I frequently say is, well, when you say have to, do you mean the state police will come and arrest you if you stop doing it?
Right.
They'll say, well, no. And I say, okay, then don't tell me you have to. Because once we can get to the point where it turns out that you are actually choosing something that you don't like, well, now we're having a productive discussion. Because why are you doing that? The only reason any human does anything more than once is that there's a payoff. Right? And if there weren't a payoff, we wouldn't do these things. And I'll have people say all the time, we're talking about clinical populations, obviously. And they'll say, well, oh no, there's no payoff. Then why do you do it again? I mean, think about hitting your thumb with a hammer. Nobody does that twice just to make sure it hurt, right?
I better try that one more time.
There's no payoff there, right? Or if there is, good.
Okay, I got a question. What about losing your temper with a loved one and saying things you shouldn't or wish you didn't later?
Well, it's an interesting topic. Sometimes, we got to remember, fighting and conflict are not the same thing. Conflict is things that can't be resolved, right? Let's think about a situation that cannot be resolved. Well, let me back up. Most conflict resolution, unquote, is presented as kind of mathematical, and things that can be just easily averaged and resolved. I want to go to the movies at 10. You want to go to the movies at 8. So we compromise and go to the movies at 9. Well, the better joke about that kind of compromise is that I want to go to the mountains. You want to go to the beach. So we compromise and go to the desert. No one's happy, right? But moreover, a lot of things can't be averaged at all. You want to have a child and I don't.
Yeah.
We average that out. You can't have half a child. That's actual conflict. That's two values that cannot be reconciled. Somebody's going to be disappointed in that scenario, all right? At least one person's going to be disappointed in that scenario. So a lot of times people will fight, meaning yelling and raised voice and, all the way up to, hitting people and throwing things to avoid dealing with actual conflict. See, if you come in and say, let's say, I know that you want to have this discussion about moving, let's say, right? And you walk in the door and on your mind is the notion that I might bring up moving again. And so you walk in and I say, how are you doing? And you say, God damn it, look at this place. This place is a pigsty. Well, now we're fighting, which prevents this actual conflict from ever being addressed.
Yeah.
So fighting is often conflict avoidance.
Right? Is that subconscious for most people?
Oh, sure. Nobody's sitting there, well, not no people, but let's say
somebody's not, for the most part, planning that out. I'm going to walk in the house, start an argument about the messy dishes so that we don't have to talk about moving.
Exactly. I mean, hardly anybody walks in the door and says, what can I blow up about? It's just the things that seem to present themselves. But the question is, is our response proportional? Or is it designed unconsciously, right, to make sure that we don't talk about this thing that I find threatening?
So how does a person start to identify, is there a root cause, or am I just an asshole that wants to scream about the messy floor or dishes?
Well, even then, I mean, there's not much purpose in that unless you can figure out what's the benefit, right? What are you getting out of screaming about the dirty dishes? What are you getting out of, if it just makes you feel powerful, okay, that's a payoff. I could see why you're doing it. So you've got to figure out, what is
for
the action.
Listeners, you can see why the person does it, but you're not condoning said action.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. You would condone somebody being verbally abusive to make themselves feel powerful?
To you, always. One of the toughest thing, I did my fellowship training at a pretty, I don't want to call them old fashioned, but a pretty traditional psychoanalytic institute. And so we read a lot of Freud, and people have this weird view that Freud was some kind of crazy doctrinaire, I guess because he was Austrian, this sort of crazy doctrinaire, martial sort of German, Austrian, telling people how to be, and nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, one of my favorite, points that Freud made is that the job of psychoanalysis isn't to change people. The job of psychoanalysis, or therapy as we'd call it today, is to put people in alignment with how they actually are. So the process is coming to grips with how you actually are, and then setting your life up so that the two go together, so that you can be congruent, that your inside and your outside are the same, right?
I've never actually heard such a explanation for.
Well, it comes up, this comes up in training all the time, right? In one of my kind of flagship lectures, we talk about intervention a lot. Like, are you going to intervene, right? If something kicks off, right? Now, for a lot of concealed carriers, in their minds, that's Super Bowl Sunday, right? Something has happened, and I am going to intervene, and I am going to smoke that bad guy, and I'm going to be a big giant hero. Okay. On the other hand, you've got the not my circus, not my monkeys crowd, right? Not my circus, not my monkeys. Well, all I say is those tend to be positions, polar positions, where people will take one or the other and defend it to the death. But meanwhile, that's a logical exercise. They have never asked themselves, what am I wired to do? What will I actually do when and if, the proverbial shit hits the fan, right? If someone starts executing people in your coffee shop, are you just going to run for the door? Okay, now, is that a morally defensible position? Absolutely. But your ass gets a vote too. What I mean is who you are, how you're made, right? Intrinsically, psychologically, how you are is going to play out, whether you think that's the best idea logically or not. And so what you'll see is some people who are high interveners, and I show some videos of these, they're high interveners, meaning they find themselves running towards the problem with the desire to help, but they're not ready. They're not prepared. Knowledge, skills, attributes, tools, nothing. And then you get people who think, well, I've decided that not intervening unless it's me or mine, that's the best position, right? Unless you're trying to kill me or my kids, I'm not getting involved. Okay, but what that means is that you're going to watch people die, where you could have done something about it. You're going to spend the rest of your life, after you finish cleaning the blood off your shoes, looking in the mirror at somebody who could have intervened and saved lives and helped and didn't. So all I ask is when people weigh this out, that they put weight on both sides of the scale. It's become super trendy now to portray intervention as the only side of this debate having any consequences. Well, I'm here to tell you that people who don't intervene are often crippled by survivor guilt.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so the notion that not intervening is always the best answer and always the safest answer, A, I think that's factually false, and B, your ass gets a vote. You're going to do what you're wired to do, whether you think it's a good idea or not. So some time spent introspecting about this and figuring out, what do you really think is best in terms of what you can live with and what you cannot live with, what you can do and what you cannot do. That's important. And it's not navel gazing.
What's a good spot for people to start at to have that internal dialogue? How do you go about having that where it doesn't go down some what if rabbit hole, like if this happens I'll do something, if that hit, you know what I mean? I
don't think that's necessarily a rabbit hole. I think it's always important to start with something that has resonance to you. It won't necessarily be salient, right? Like okay, I'm at the Las Vegas shooting, what could I do? Well, hold on a second, do you go to concerts? I mean, it's got to be in some way resonant to you first off, right? Does it speak to you in some way? Is it on your mind in some way? And sit down in a quiet place and think about it. What we want to do is thought experiments, right? If that happened, okay, let's say the extreme non-intervener, that I'm going to save myself first and foremost, and frankly, other people's saving themselves is their problem. Okay, let's follow that through. What will you likely see? What will you witness? Okay, let's say you do survive, but, dozens or hundreds of people are killed. What does survival mean? Does it mean pretending to be dead while you're covered with the blood of other people? I don't know. And then you've got to think it all the way through. What will I say to myself the morning after when I look in the mirror?
Yeah.
And you have to try and imagine this in as much detail as you can. And I've had people say to me, that, what? Yes, I've accepted the risk. I feel like I'm a high intervener. I just am. I'm somebody that's not going to let people get slaughtered right in front of me. Okay. And if I run that risk, right, you break it, you bought it. If you intervene, if I'm killed, I've had people say this to me, that people will appreciate that I died doing something that was authentic to me. And they'll appreciate that. And they'll say, yeah, that was Bob all the way through to the end. That was an authentic choice. And even though he paid the price, he knew what he was getting into, and that he died being consistent with how he really was. That's not failure in my mind. Trying to do right, I don't think is wrong, regardless of the outcome.
What ingredients make a high intervener? Is that something that's innate? Is that something genetic? Is that something learned? Do we know?
By and large, that's innate, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you even think about things like people's startle response, right? Like what happens, when there's loud noise, right? There are some people who literally jump. I mean, you can see air, under them. And then there are some people who just turn and see what it was.
You don't think
also
that some of that is conditioned through childhood experiences?
Yes and no, but a lot of it is just intrinsic. I mean, think about sensation seeking. It's very tough to find somebody who teaches themselves to like roller coasters or teaches themselves to like very, very spicy food. You kind of either do or don't. There's a sort of a threshold value that you're born with. I encourage your people to look into heart rate variability. There are people who are just innately less variable in their heart rate, and that's an incredibly desirable trait for high-level operators in critical occupations, right? Military police operators at the very highest level. Heart rate variability is a big old deal. The kind of people who, when they're startled, their heart rate doesn't rise very much, and it tends to get back down very, very quickly. They just don't startle easy. But there's some paradoxical effects. They tend to die pretty early, often of heart disease.
They wear out.
We often say that, just like in Blade Runner, the light that burns twice as bright burns half as long. That's a sort of an innate trait. And we're all made somewhat differently, and then our experiences operate on us. But the sort of basic envelope is sort of assigned by the manufacturer, the basic performance envelope. You can certainly change it. Think about, the first time you ever walked into an indoor range, when somebody else fired a gun, you jumped. Yeah. Holy crap. And now you don't, right? But there are certainly people out there who are going to jump just about every time, right? They're not ever going to adapt to that very much.
Just like a boxer can stand and get hit about the head without curling up in a ball.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Speaking of indoor ranges, another sidetrack. When I meant rabbit hole back a minute, what I meant is how people can just what if a scenario to death, and it's like, a way to never really sit and define, if this happens, I'll do this, because there's always some unplanned variable.
I don't think that is wasted time.
I'm not suggesting it is. What I'm saying is, and what I guess my intention was in bringing it up is, you have to be able to, from a pragmatic standpoint, at some point sit down and say, and I'm not suggesting people should intervene, not intervene, but if you're trying to decide what you're made of, you at some point have to look at some hard choices and say, I can't control everything. And if this thing or this thing happens, here's my response, without constantly wavering and adding in more possible cosmic.
Well, what I think about is this. I think the permutations are important, but provided that you're not wedded to any of them in advance, right? Like, let's say somebody says, if there's a mass shooting, I'm going to intervene. But if one guy's killing another guy, I'm not going to intervene. Okay, now, why? And think that through in your mind. And if you can get to the point of kind of, moral certainty about that distinction, then yeah, I would totally intervene on a mass shooting. But, Pee Wee kills Skillet, Ralph kills Bob, Jane kills Sally, that ain't none of my business. Okay, right? The principle's the same, just the number's different. But if you can get to the point where you can make sense of that and live with it all the way through, then it's not my place from the outside to say you're right or you're wrong. Right? We want to make decisions that are authentic, that really reflect who I am, and are practicable. They're things that I can actually do. I mean, there are people who hey, I was helping Mass Ayub teach a class once, and as we were, shaking hands with all the students, thanks very much for coming, at the end of the week, this woman sort of mumbled under her breath, boy, I hope I never have to shoot anybody. And I said, whoa, wait, hold on a second. I kind of pulled her off to the side, and I said, tell me what you mean. She said, I can't do it. I can't shoot somebody. Now, she had shot well and qualified and, shot well above minimum standards. I mean, sort of top of the middle performer as a shooter. But she said, I can't do it. I can't point a gun at a real live person and shoot them no matter who they are, no matter what they've done. Okay. She found out something incredibly important during that week, because now she is liberated from all the masturbatory stuff we do, calibers and brands and carry methods and this and that and the other thing. If she can't do it, then she has no business ever carrying a gun. But she can spend all of the energy that would otherwise be wasted figuring out what she can do. Maybe she spends a ton of time figuring out criminal assault paradigms and spending time observing the people around her and paying deep attention to the other kinds of threats to her, and working on running far and fast. Well, you know what? She's a lot safer spending her energy and time on those things, allocating her resources toward those things, which she can do, as opposed to carrying a gun, which she cannot use.
How as a medical professional would, and this may be a long answer, what's the difference between her actually, and it sounds like this is the case, she knew herself, and you recognize this woman knows herself. She knows who she is as a person and her makeup. What's the difference, or how do you figure out if that is the case versus she's just hasn't yet come to the conclusion that sometimes violence happens and she may have to shoot somebody, and hey, look, lady, you just got to toughen up. And
hold on a second. She didn't have any illusions about violence happening.
What I'm saying, I'm painting a picture. I'm not saying that was her. I'm just saying, like, hey, look, yes, it's terrible. I know you don't want to shoot somebody. You don't feel you can do it, but you're going to probably have to. Like, how do you go from, okay, good, that's not for you, I'm glad you arrived at that conclusion, so instead let's look at this other stuff. And I'm not contradicting your analysis of her. I'm just saying, like, for instructors listening and stuff, if they hear something like that, and my response would just be like, well, wait a second here. Like, let's just paint a picture. And that you think you still wouldn't be able to do it. I had a state rep that we used to do some work with when we were passing some legislation here. We've been lobbying for teachers to be able to have provisions to be able to be trained to be armed in schools. This state rep at the time was a school teacher, smallish lady, 5 foot nothing, and she's got 5 kids. I'm in her office with 2 other friends of mine lobbying down in our Capitol, and she said, Mick, I can't do it. I can't shoot somebody as such. I'm not going to expect my other teachers to do it. I told the state rep, I'm going to close your door to your office. We knew each other. And I said, okay, let's just assume Matt and Eric, the 2 guys that are with me who are bigger than I am, and I'm 6 foot, 200 pounds, and your kids were here, Eric's going to rape your kids, Matt's going to film it, and I'm going to like chop people up with axes and shit, and you're going to watch, and then we're going to chop you up. She's like, I'll gouge your face out, chop your head off with a hatchet, you know, shoot you with missiles. And like, we just like tapped into that a little bit. And like, she just hadn't thought about it. So what's the difference between this woman that like knew herself and somebody like that just hadn't really thought about it?
You believed her?
Well, that's why I'm asking you. I guess I think as like a mother, I would assume. This is why I'm talking to you about it. So I would think like a mother, you know, like imagining their child being hurt would freaking do. That's what we always are told, right? A mother will.
People are who they are, not who they're supposed to be. Not who they're, you know, sort of makes us comfortable for them to be. What if she can't do it? What if she, you know, what if you're faced with someone who would rather die than take someone else's life? To say, oh, well, you just haven't thought it through. Well, that's pretty insulting, frankly.
So,
I mean, how can you know your mind better than they do? What was interesting to me is that this woman discovered this reality about herself that she wasn't planned to. That argues to me very powerfully that it is, in fact, authentic.
She had invested her time and
over
money.
The course of that, absolutely. She wasn't there to figure this out. She was there to take a Elite Force Institute class. And during the course of a week of thinking about it quite a bit and being in the class and sort of, you know, being, you know, neck deep in that material, something came clear to her. To say, well, you're wrong, that strikes me as unbelievably presumptuous. Right?
Well, that's why I'm asking how where your thinking's coming from on that. So people are who they are and not who they're supposed to be. Does that go for the people you talk about in your Unthinkable, the guy that skins people alive, the guy that locks up kids in closets? Is that guy is who he is and not who we think he's supposed to be?
Well, sure. Think about it. I mean, should you know, that's a real case, by the way. That was a patient that I had in residential drug and alcohol treatment. One of his earliest childhood memories was his dad. His dad had custody of him, and his dad would go out and party, and to make that possible, he would zip his son up in a sleeping bag till only his face showed, and hang him in a closet, and leave him there for days. Sometimes.
How old was he?
When it started, I think he was just a young kid, 5, 6, 7, in there. Yeah. You know, that's horrific kind of abuse, right? Well, that's a dad who is who he is, not who we want him to be. I mean, that's not something, you know, that we want anyone's dad to do to anyone anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
But that's what happened to him. But so introspection is incredibly helpful if you're honest about it. When you're posing yourself questions, how do I really feel about that? It robs you of the posturing and the social things you have to do when you're talking about it with someone else. Like if I'm talking to you about it, my position is truly that I can't kill another person, right? That I would rather die than kill another person, no matter who they are or what they've done. Most people aren't going to say that out loud. But if that truly is you in the quiet of your own conscience, you know, finding it out is absolutely crucial. Because there are a lot of people walking around with guns as a fashion accessory, and as an extension of their personality. I mean, you know, one of my favorite moments in Tom Gibbons' class is he asks students, "Why do you carry a gun?" And you hear all these sorts of elevated reasons. So no one can impose their will upon me, so I can protect my loved ones, this and that and the other thing. And Tom says, no, the reason you're carrying a gun is that you've decided that you might have to kill someone today. That you might have to kill someone today, and a pistol's the most efficient way to be prepared for that isn't, you know, otherwise, you know, impracticable. You know, and so it people just sort of, whoa.
Yeah, little heavy.
Somebody. I mean, you are carrying the power of life and death literally on your person. It would be nice if you'd spend a second or two thinking about that.
That's good stuff. Tom's
a wizard.
Tom's a wizard. I know a couple Green Berets that's actually something that one of them says he passed on to his, not only the guys that served under him, but to his children now who are older. He looks at, he does it himself. He says now he's an older guy, retired. He looks in the mirror before he leaves the house and says, today's the day I might have to take a man's life. And he's, dry fire. And he has done that before in reality, but he makes that, gets himself in that frame of mind. So it's not some hurdle he has to cross in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, and it's important to have thought this sort of stuff through, because simple fact is, if you think an action is not possible for you, let's say you think it's morally objectionable or something like that, you won't do it. I had a patient who was a police officer who had an encounter with a homeless guy go really, really sideways, and he wound up in a sort of a grappling match with this guy. And the guy went for a disarming attempt, and he ended up losing his pistol in the street. And in order to save his own life, he had to beat the guy to death with a handheld radio. The guy was getting a hold of his gun. He was losing the grappling match, and he had to beat that guy to death with a handheld radio. He did not wake up in the morning. This is not a barbarian. He did not wake up in the morning and go, oh, I can't wait to crack somebody's head open and watch their brain leak out. That'll just be so much fun. Yeah. But he had gotten to the point where he was prepared to do whatever was necessary to solve his problem, as opposed to be unable to do it and be shot to death.
Yeah.
So, figuring out, what are you capable of doing? What are the things that are a bridge too far for you? That's really important, because a lot of people say, well, rely on the fact that they're just going to go nuts, or rely on the fact that they're just going to have some berserker level of motivation in there.
You don't want to see me mad.
No. By and large, if you can't contemplate it, you won't do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's very clear.
I dig that. My friend Jared Rest, and I repeat him often, he says, I've killed 1 million men 1 million ways 1 million times. And of course, the context to that is what we're talking about. It's not like he's sickly fantasizing about it, but people hear that. I've heard him talk about that before, and people think, oh, that's horrible. Like, you don't need to be thinking about that. But he's just talking about exactly what we're describing. Mm-hmm.
But, if you force me to pick between those two extremes, never ever thinking about it, then hoping I'll do it right, at midnight on the corner of State and Main, or thinking about it all the time, I'm clearly going to pick thinking about it all the time.
Yeah.
I don't think those are the only options, of course. But if you ask me to pick one of those, I'm picking pretty clearly.
Sometimes it's easy in this genre of our society to go down to that place where it's all the time. You can't sit and talk about the blue sky or the roses or some sweet jazz music. Everybody's sometimes, I don't know about you, but like when I'm out doing a class or something, I tell people if we're going to go to dinner or drinks, I say, let's go, I'll party. We'll, get some beers and steaks, but I ain't talking about guns or shooting, because we've been doing it for 12 hours straight, What do you do when you're out there? You're like, let's cut loose and we'll talk about something else for a while.
It would be nice, but it for a lot of people that's kind of a hidden truth about training is, one of the values of training, I will never forget. I don't know if you know James Keating of Combat Technologies.
I don't know, but I know who he is.
Yeah. Jim's a very interesting dude. And I went to a Riddle of Steel one year, which is a sort of big knife Woodstock, so to speak. And we were sitting at dinner, and Jim looks at me and he said, one of the reasons people come to events like this. And I said, well, yeah, sure. Camaraderie and all that. And he said, no, it's not camaraderie. It's being around people who don't think you're crazy, and to a certain extent, I think that is a real, value of training. It's
almost full circle back to talking about the herd mentality.
Yeah. You can sort of come out of the closet. And say, most people,
I like guns and knives.
Hey, there are lots of people who are married to people that they don't discuss this very
I've
important
got
part of their life.
Tupperware totes full of holsters I can't even use.
Now, you're not really troubled. I always say you're not really a troubled gun person until you own parts for guns you don't own. Then you cross the line, you know. Like, oh yeah, I've got that Cheetah magazine. Okay, why? You don't own the gun. Well, yeah, I don't know. It was a really good deal. You know, but you know, tons of people in our lives. You know, if you were to say, yeah, you know, I've really been thinking a lot. I've been putting a lot of time into trying to figure out, you know, what am I going to use for a small knife? You know, center line carry, kind of offhand accessible knife. And people say, what?
Yeah, what are you talking about?
You mean like a real knife? You mean like you want to carry a real knife? I mean, carry a real knife around with you?
That's funny.
Why? And suddenly you're not having the conversation you want to have. You're having 20 conversations back, and that's just tiresome. And
Dude,
so, you know,
I'm sorry.
No, I just don't blame people for wanting to talk about guns and knives and shooting and all that sort of stuff.
Sure.
Class, because they're finally free to do it.
What I meant by that is sometimes, so there is that. I always am talking about this, thinking about it, because it's, to me, it sometimes leads to paranoia. I don't know. Some people I've come in contact with. I was just in Ohio, and I'm with the range owners. They're both cops. They're actually attached to marshal units, and one of them's a ranger, and he's a super cool dude, very nonchalant, and we're chatting, and we're talking about one of the guys that was in a class on another bay, and he was a pretty gung-ho dude. And I go, yeah, I bet that guy's probably got like a suit of armor at home, and he goes to like LARPing conventions, and I'm kind of making a joke. And the dude looks at me, and he's like, yeah, what's wrong with that? And I'm like, nothing. I'm just saying. He walks me in and tells me that he's got a complete, authentic, full war-ready suit of 15th century armor. He goes to Europe and takes place in these full contact sword fights with real blunted swords and axes and stuff. He just started laughing, like, and it's his life. He started talking about the in-depth parts of it. I'm like, oh man, I plucked the right string here and opened it up. But to your point, you're right. I'm not saying let's not talk about it, but why I brought it up is it's okay too to sometimes think about other things besides it.
Yeah, you know, there should be the rest of there should be the rest of life. But then there's also this weird thing that I like to call the +2 effect, which is anybody who does what I do, but they do it a little bit more than me. There's something wrong with that guy. You know, like oh, I go shooting twice a week. Oh yeah, but somebody goes 4 times a week. That dude's got a problem.
Yeah, he's a
so it is always funny that people can rationalize anything as long as they do it slightly less than somebody else.
That's funny. I've got a lot of friends that shoot and train a lot more than me, and I don't fault them. I have one friend, he's a national level USPSA competitor, grandmaster. He tells women, he just had a girl that I thought he was going to marry. He told her, and he ruined the relationship. He told her, this shooting thing I do is more important than you'll ever be in my life. If you can't handle that, don't get close. And she thought, okay, that's weird. And they hung out for a couple months, and then she realized it is way more important. He has a great full-time job that it is the only time that he is not loading ammo, cleaning guns. He goes to matches in Europe, and he was in Jamaica this year for the Pan Ams and does all of these. That is all he cares about. Like, fanatic.
In my mind, he was very upfront with her. I mean, he did her a favor. It may be that she heard that and thought, well, that can't possibly be true. He's exaggerating. When someone tells you how they are, we should listen.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's a romantic comedy where it's about baseball or something, where the guy and the gal start dating in the off season, and he tells her once baseball season starts, like, I'm kind of a fanatic, and she's like, okay, I like baseball too, and didn't realize that, I forgot who it was, but that was the same thing. It was this whole life was baseball.
Well, it's one of those cliches about women, is that they buy men as projects, so to speak. I was teasing a female friend of mine once, and I said, come out and say it. Your goal is to find the perfect man and then change every little thing about it.
That's true.
She wasn't as amused by that as I was, but
she knew it was true.
We just disagreed about that.
There's a comedian, I forget who it is. Years ago, he's doing a little skit talking about you meet a girl, life's great, you got your own apartment, it's all set up with all your cool shit, you got your record player and your cinder blocks with boards and stuff with all your stereo, and this girl comes into your life and goes like, oh my God, look at all your stuff, it's so stupid, and slowly all your shit gets pushed out to the curb and new pictures even though she doesn't live there, and it's kind of a funny comedy sketch, but it's true. Yeah, we're all works in progress.
That's when Harry met Sally, Yeah. As he gets rid of the wagon wheel coffee table. All right.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the truth. I appreciate you taking the time, Dr. Aprill. I've got 4 awesome names for this podcast. You'll have to wait and see. I've been taking notes as we've been talking here.
So in other words, you've been not paying attention.
100% paid attention. As you said, important things. I thought that could be a good title for the podcast.
Interesting. Well, I hope your audience of devotees doesn't think we wandered around too much.
No, I think it was all good stuff. I think we delved into various areas that were meaningful for people with or without passions for being protectors of themselves, and there's some good stuff there for people with relationships and looking to improve self. How do people find you?
One of the best places to sort of sample little nuggets. I try to put up 5 to 7 a week for sure. Is on Instagram, frankly. Aprill Risk Consulting. It's Aprill with 2 L's, kind of like that. Aprill Risk Consulting on Instagram, and then I sort of cross post the same stuff on Facebook. And it's a good way to kind of see my take on topical things, things that have happened around me, things that I've discovered, and a little bit of everything. A lot about criminal behavior, a lot about the sort of thought processes that victims have, and that moment where good guy and bad guy meet, right, and the things that are brought to the table at that moment. It's really important. So I think about it quite a bit and try to talk about it as clearly as I can.
I think it's super important. I quote your stuff often to people. I tell them it was from me, but whatever.
That's all that matters.
That was a joke. Always a pleasure. I think this is your 3rd time on here with us, and we always get good comments and feedback from it. If you guys are interested in hosting him for training, you can get a hold of him through his website, I'm sure, and set up one of his training programs. You do lectures as well as range training that kind of supports the stuff that we're talking about, right?
Absolutely. The kind of flagship course is called Unthinkable, and it's a half a day deep dive on victim selection. How are victims chosen? And most importantly, not chosen. And so that's what we got to worry on. And then the developmental psychology of violent criminal offenders. All right, this is the second half of the day. It's a long full day, but I think it's pretty illuminating, and we do that quite a bit.
I've enjoyed. Last time you were up here, we attended your seminar over at Paul Sharp's gym, and
that was a half day seminar. That
was some dynamic information that got my brain thinking and reminded me about the cruelty that humans inflict on each other.
Yeah, that was an interesting audience because a lot of those were very accomplished martial artists. And they were it was interesting that they were willing to acknowledge the fact that practicing fighting, right, rolling jiu-jitsu, sparring, boxing, kickboxing, et cetera, can become an endeavor of its own. But that doesn't mean that you've necessarily covered the bases in terms of your thoughts about what you're going to do with criminal aggression.
Yeah.
So I was really pleased, and Paul has a group of excellent killers there that recognize that you train sport, but you think street. Those two go hand in hand, and we don't want to be in silos. I mean, it's not that uncommon to hear about, from Brazil, really accomplished elite level international fighters being killed by a dime a dozen street level criminals. And that's shocking when you think, but it's evidence of that kind of silo thinking.
Yeah. I tell students, even Muhammad Ali got knocked out or knocked down. Yeah, none of us are bulletproof for sure.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, Mick. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. You guys listening, if you're listening on one of the podcast channels, hit one of the buttons that allows you to leave a review. Leave a review for this podcast and share it on your social media. Put a link up so people can hear it that you care about, that you think this information would be beneficial for. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for that. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the little bell thing that says you'll get notifications for when we put more videos up like this. And as always, tell somebody you love them before you go to bed. Give yourself a hug. And don't be a dickhead tomorrow. Be well. Visit our website, carrytrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., Carry Trainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@carrytrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@carrytrainer.com or carrytrainer.com.